Chapter 5. Chapter 5 is my favorite chapter. Why? It's all about sex. So, we're going to take a look at sex, gender, and sexuality as a whole. Now, if you wanted to go into this chapter more in depth, we're just going to cover the top. If you just want to go more in depth, then that is Psych 280, and that's sexuality or human sexuality. For chapter 4, when it was developmental psychology, that is, if you wanted to go into that more extensively, Psych 220. So let's begin. First, has gender and sexual identity played a role in who you are today? Of course, we have the options yes, no, or I don't know. If you're being honest with yourself, it'll always be yes. Some people will say no, but from the moment you were born, it was whether you were a boy or a girl. We have gender reveals that happen now that are a really big idea and a really big deal for everyone. It's all about what gender you are and that sexual identity that goes along with the gender that can wreak havoc and helps us to develop who we are. So when it comes to gender development, you first need to know the definition that our book states for gender, which is physical, social, and behavioral characteristics that are culturally, notice, it's culturally associated with male and female roles and their identity. Culturally associated means that that is not your gender or definition of gender is not a genetic aspect. It is what culture says males should behave like, females should behave like, think like, every aspect of who they are. Because of that gender definition, again, it can play give us problems with our identities, with the names that you get called, with the roles that are automatically associated, and we'll discuss those as we go through this chapter. Now, when we look at traits or genetic differences, there are some that we're going to discuss right off the bat, but a great deal of our roles are all played into the cultural aspect. So let's look at some differences and similarities. Women start puberty 2 years sooner than men do on average. Women tend to live 5 years longer than men do, also on average. Women have 70% more body fat. Typically, I'd ask the class, now why is it that women have 70% more body fat? And some will say it has to do with the buttocks. Some will say it has to do with the breasts. Those are a partial play in it. They have 70% more body fat than men overall so that they can bear children. The way our bodies are set up is that if for some reason we went through a survival period while pregnant, that fetus needs to live off of the body fat that we have ready and at their disposal. So 70% more body fat on average. Now, can women be thinner than men? Can women have less body fat? Absolutely. Remember, these are all on averages, an average 70% more body fat. So remember that there are some females that can be quite thin and less body fat, and other females that are going to be quite a bit larger to produce that 70% overall. But they do need it in order to bear children. Go underneath of that, and the ability to bear children becomes more difficult, if not null and void. And that brings in the muscle tone. Women have 40% less muscle on average. Again, can a woman have more muscle? Absolutely. I've seen some of those weightlifting programs and whatnot where women are just built, but on average, 40% less muscle. Now, the fat and the muscle play in to each other. Muscle has the ability to lose fat easier. More muscle, lose fat. So when it comes to females, if a man and a woman were both going to lose weight at the same time, they were both the exact same weight, they both eat and drink the exact same things, they both do the exact same exercise, men will always come out and do better. They will lose far more weight. They will also gain far more muscle. So This is on average. Women hate this fact because of our thin society and wanting to be thin, but it is so that we can bear children, and it's just a part of evolution. Women tend to be 5 inches shorter on average than men. They tend to express more emotion. That's culturally taught that it is more acceptable for females to cry, for females to become enraged. There's all sorts of things that are the expression of emotion is more accepted. So you can look back at when you're younger and a little girl cries to her dad and says, you know, somebody's beating up at me at school, somebody's picking on me. She's allowed to cry. Or a boy that goes to his father or parents and says, starts crying and says he's being beat up. They'll call him names probably. They'll tell him that it's not acceptable for a boy to cry and to go back and, you know, beat him up. Women are more vulnerable to anxiety and depression, but they are less likely to be on the spectrum, autism spectrum disorder. They are less likely to have an addiction to alcohol. It has to do with the dehydrogenase in our stomachs. It makes us pray to the porcelain god or puke more often than men do. So we actually have to work harder at becoming an alcoholic. I always have difficulty with women that brag that they can drink any man under the table. They're working hard at the alcohol addiction. We are less likely to have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder or attention deficit disorder. There's a couple of things that play into that. First, brain issues that can come into play, that X gene issue that we have already discussed that can come into play, but also there's a cultural aspect to it where we do tend to see females have more of the ADD without the hyperactivity, so they don't get diagnosed as often because they're not acting out as often, and that's a cultural thing. Antisocial personality disorder. Antisocial personality disorder is our psychopaths and sociopaths. Now, many people believe that that is just up to the level of serial killer. It is not. When we go into personality disorders, we'll discuss more that there's a range, just like everything else that we have. There's a range, and most of our psychopaths and sociopaths, otherwise known as antisocial personality disorder, are actually at the lower end of the range, where they're just in relationships and it's all about them, that they don't really care about the other person's feelings, emotions, or the relationship aspect. Does it mean that they won't be in a relationship? The answer is no. Of course, they'll be in a relationship, and those relationships are very one-sided. And then, of course, we have suicide. Now, when it comes to suicide, we're not talking about parasuicide. Parasuicide are attempted suicides. Women have more attempted suicides, but men have more completion rates, which means that they actually complete it and do commit suicide. It mainly has to do with the methods that are used between males and females. Females tend to use prescription medication or some kind of pill form to try to attempt suicide, which gives you a longer range of time to change your mind. And we find that changing your mind is something that happens with all, no matter what method they use. So you have a longer range of changing your mind. You have a longer range of people finding you and stopping it. The main reason women use pills is because they still want to look good when they're dead. So they'll do their hair, they'll do their makeup, they'll put on whatever outfit it is they want to be buried in so that they can still look good. They also have the concern of who's going to find their body. They want them to find them and not have brains all over the place or blood spewing. They want it to be clean, not as messy. Men, on the other hand, number one way of committing suicide is, of course, guns, which gives that brain matter, blood spewing, that kind of thing. So they're not as concerned about who's going to find their body, how that body's going to be found. They want it done, and they want it done now. Now, we are having a higher rate of women. They are starting to build that gun use more and more. And the more they use guns, the more the completion of suicide will be done. There's a real hard time to change your mind, not enough time to change your mind, not enough time to find you from the click of that gun to the point in time the bullet enters. We do have many similarities, and the main similarities are all of our genetics except for that one sex gene are the same. Our brain structures and their functions are also the same. We tend to have similar intelligence, knowledge, and happiness. Now, for that happiness, we have to take out the teenage years. So when we look overall at everybody other than teenagers, then we can look at the same happiness levels. Those teenage years for females with that estrogen just pounding them reduces that happiness rate. When we look at it on a scale, though, also during those teenage years, their depths of depression can be far more severe and significant, but their level of joy can be much higher. So again, when we average that out, then it tends to be linked right into that same averageness. We in the United States are obsessed with sex. Sex sells. It's in every ad, it's in movies, it's in all sorts of things that we have around us because it does sell. Now, why is it that we're so obsessed with sex? We're obsessed with sex because we don't discuss it. We discuss don't do it because you can die from it. Don't do it because you can get pregnant from it. Don't do it because religiously, morally, it's horrible. Even though it's an evolutionary thing, just like hunger, it is that innate in us. So we really push out into our society what a negative aspect it is because we don't talk about the positives of it, because we don't talk about how to please each other or ourselves, we tend to become overly obsessed with it. The more we say, I'm not obsessed with that thought process, the more we're fighting against ourselves to say that we're not obsessed with it. When we look at gender, we have to look at the differences of aggression as well. Men have more testosterone. Testosterone is linked to physical aggression. So men tend to be more physically aggressive than females. When it comes to verbal and relational, it used to be that women were more verbally and relationally aggressive. We are now finding that men and women are almost even on the verbal aggression. Women, though, are the ones that are very much relational aggression. Relational aggression means not only am I mad at you, but all of my friends are going to be mad at you or they're not going to be my friends. So relational aggression has to do with everybody coming in on it. Family, all your relationships are in on that aggression. When it comes to physical compared to relational aggression, physical aggression, you can punch each other and then they'll help each other up and they become friends and everything's okay. Relational aggression tends to be a lifelong issue. The person that you hated and couldn't stand in elementary school, you still can't stand in high school. You still can't stand when you come back 5 years later for your class reunion, if you even come back, because she might be there. There's all sorts of things that last for that relational aggression. It is not something that women tend to be able to get over throughout their lifespan. Now, when it comes to physical aggression and violent acts, can women do them? And of course they can. Now, what we find for women that are more physically aggressive, I want you to think back to high school. And who was that girl that was always fighting all the time? And then I want you to look at her physically. Can you tell there's more testosterone running through her system? Did she have broader shoulders, a squarer jaw, built more like a man because she has higher testosterone levels? Higher testosterone means more aggression. So women can have that if they're physically set up that way, if their body is bringing in more testosterone. We also have to look at terrorism. Now, terrorism goes on the other aspect, though. When it comes to physical aggression, it can also relate to the relational aggression. So how does it relate to relational? Typically, it's for their man, quite honestly. So they will harm somebody for their man. That person hurt their man. Their man believes a certain way, so they will believe that way. We unfortunately find that in many aspects, just in voting alone. Women will vote like their fathers. Women will vote like their significant others will, because that's what they believe is the most important, the relationship that they have with that person. So they will have their beliefs set off of that person. And that's who they'll listen to more than they will anybody else. That includes terrorism. When it comes to, I get asked all the time, well, what about women that commit suicide and become bombers and that kind of thing through terrorism? And it all tends to be for a man. Unfortunate but true. Again, on average, will all women do it? No. But we do tend to find out for those women that do, what were their reasonings, and the man behind it tends to be the reason. Now, what that we are speaking more and more about lesbians. Lesbians will say, again, it was for the relationship, or it was for their parents, father figure most often. Now, do we have stereotypes or gender roles that we believe are particular to males and females? Of course, they have a few answers there that you can choose from. The answer is always going to be yes. We have been raised culturally to believe that there are certain behaviors for men, certain behaviors for females, and if you don't abide by those behaviors, then you can be deemed an outcast because of them. So first we'll look at that gender and social connection. When it comes to play, there are differences between men and women genetically based. So when we look at boys right off the bat, whenever they play, their play tends to be focused on activities. Women's tend to be focused on a connection, interaction, conversation. Men play far more competitively, and they start that right out of the womb. You put a line down in front of a couple of them, and it's always going to be a race. When it comes to females, that is taught culturally. Females come out of the womb, and it's all about social interaction, social understanding. When it comes to men and how they interact while young, and this continues until they're older, they dictate how things are going to work. So they're playing a game and they'll say, all right, these are the rules, blah, 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 blah. And you can either abide by those rules or not play. We don't care. Females, on the other hand, are more concerned about making sure everybody's involved. So right from a young age, they'll say, all right, here's the rules. And one of the girls will say, well, I don't really like those rules. So they'll alter the rules to make sure that that girl can be included. Unless, of course, there's relational aggression in there and they don't like her. But otherwise, the whole thing is about making everybody involved in that social aspect. Now, on the female side, you'll notice it says feedback. Right off the get-go, we find that females look for feedback. And we can see it no matter how old they get. They buy an outfit. And the first thing they do, even though they loved that outfit, they will go to other females and say, how do you like my outfit? And if they hate it, that outfit will never come out of the closet again. It's gone. How do you like my hairstyle? If other people don't like it, then they'll change it. So they will change themselves to get that positive feedback from others. It takes a lot of cultural intervention to undo that feedback aspect. And even if we'll say, all right, I'm not changing my hairstyle because I like my hairstyle, I don't care what you think, they will worry about it over and over and over again. It's called rumination. And that rumination will play constantly that somebody didn't like their hairstyle, even though they did. Now, when it looks at gender stereotypes, we have males and we have females and a long list underneath of them. Now, this study was done in 2001. I haven't changed the slide, even though this study is done every 3 years, because what we find is every 3 years, the terms that are used stereotypically are always the same. So we don't really have to change the slide because we remain the same. So I want you to look at some of them. So when we look at males, we're saying that they're unemotional, they have confidence, they're forceful and independent, but they're also aggressive, they're also dominant, they're cruel. There's negative terms and positive terms that go along with those stereotypes. Females have the same thing. Females are whiny, but yet they're sexy. They're affectionate. They're charming. They're complaining. They're submissive. There's positive, there's negative terms, and what we find is that a lot of these stereotypes that we get taught across cultures over and over, generation after generation, not only create who we are, but can also create the opposing side of it. So we don't like that term submissive, so there's not a chance that we're going to become submissive. So we'll fight against the stereotype to become the opposing side of it. The same thing with men. They'll fight against the stereotype to become the opposing side. The problem with it is females are more okay with culturally fighting against the opposing side than we are yet with males. So males that are emotional can have some stereotypical terms used with them that are on the negative side. If they play the opposing side and fight against that, then culturally we can say that that is wrong, unfortunately. So let's look at personality. When we look at areas of personality for men and women, which one of these four are we least similar or most different on? Number one is impulsiveness and orderliness. Impulsiveness is spontaneity, doing it on the spot. Orderliness, everything in its place. Number two is nurturance and assertiveness. Nurturance would be that parental thing of love and caring, compassion. Assertiveness, being able to say no and stick with it. Number three, we have phobias and disorders. Phobias, fears of snakes, spiders, going outside, heights, that kind of stuff. Disorders, mental illnesses. Yep, we have depression and anxiety, but we also have schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, all sorts of other aspects, including personality disorders, that can come into play there. Sexual experiences is number four. How many times you've done it? So I want you to pick which one for yourself. You can write it down, just put it in your mind's eye, whatever. Which one do you think we are the most different on? Now let's discuss them. Impulsiveness and orderliness, we are exactly the same on average. Nurturance and assertiveness, we are actually the most different on, and that would be the actual correct answer. Females are the most nurturant throughout their life until they start to hit menopause, and then they will start to become more assertive. Remember, our estrogen is going down, testosterone's taking over. Assertiveness tends to be men. They can say no and stick with it, and that has to do with that testosterone level that they have in their body. But as they get into their 60s and beyond, they will become more nurturant. So I want you to think of it this way with men. If you ask your parents about their parents, who was it that was most assertive? When they said no, that meant no, and there was no changing their mind. Who was the more, I don't want to say abusive, but yet that comes into play. Who was the one who spanked you more often? That kind of stuff. And then parents will say, well, whoa, wait a minute. When they became a grandparent, all of a sudden grandpa's the one who's sneaking you out. All of a sudden grandpa's the one who's giving you ice cream for dinner. All of a sudden grandpa's got that assertive or that nurturance that he didn't seem to have when he was a parent. That is perfectly normal. Phobias and disorders, we're exactly the same on when we average them out. There are some of them more women will have. There are some of them more men will have. But on average, when we put them all together, they're about the same. And then we have to go to number four, sexual experiences. Now, why is it that some of you would believe that our sexual experiences were the least similar? And that is because we lie. Both men and women lie. Well, they lie because of culture and what culture has told them to do and what culture says that is wanted from them. The other thing is that we just plain and simply count differently. So let's take a look at it. When we look at sexual experiences and the cultural aspect of it, women will cut their number in half. So if you were in a relationship and you said, all right, how many sexual experiences do you have? Women reduce that number. They reduce that number because of the stigma that is associated with having sex. The stigma is that they're a slut. And so because of that, they don't want to be a slut, so they'll reduce the number. Men, on the other hand, culturally are told that they need to have the experience. Why? Women don't talk about what they want. Women don't tell you what they need to get to where they want to go, otherwise known as that orgasm. So men tend to have the experience. Women sort of hope that if you've had enough experiences, you've had an epiphany with somebody. You've had that aha moment with somebody that now says that you're capable of doing it with me too. And so lots of experiences. So we tend to find that culturally they will double their number and increase that number of experiences so that they let you know that they can get you where you want to go. Now, when it comes to counting, we also have to look at that. When it comes to sexual experiences with women compared to men, men will count every single time. So you're in a relationship, a man-woman relationship, and you have had sex every single night out of a year. Wonderful relationship, by the way. But in that wonderful relationship, they will count 365 days, 365 times, so there's your 365. Now, of course, we have to double in there, that kind of thing, to really increase those numbers. But they're looking at how many times you did it. Women count differently. They look at sexual experiences as people. How many people have I been with? So you might have been in a relationship for a year and had 365 different sexual experiences, but that was only one person, so that counts as one only. Not how many times you did it, how many people it was done with. Now that number can also change. So throughout the years, if a woman's been dumped by somebody, they might say that we're going to be friends afterwards, but, that really doesn't tend to work out well because they hate you for dumping them. That hate means they want to forget you completely to take the pain away. So can they have a sexual experience with somebody that they are now voiding from their brain completely? And the answer will be no. When you're young, you'll think, oh, that doesn't really work out well, and I don't do that. But as you progress through age, it will become an automatic thing. Women will forget the people. They'll say, yeah, so-and-so dumped me, or they'll remember dating them lightly, but it wasn't really a big deal. At the time, it was. And because it wasn't really a big deal, they don't remember having sex with that person any longer. They nullify them completely, so their experiences actually get reduced over time because of it. So here's our answer. We are the most similar on impulsiveness and orderliness, the least similar on nurturance and assertiveness. Now, does everything from advertising to children's books specify a child's gender role development? So I gave you questions or the options to choose from. Yes, no, it depends on the parents. That's that cultural aspect. But what we actually know is, yes, of course it has, right from a very young age. So when we look at gender, right from the first reading book you're ever going to read, you're going to see the boy always getting dirty, playing with the dogs, playing in the mud, being more aggressive, playing more activity roles or sports like baseball, that kind of stuff. The girls always tend to be in a nurturant aspect. It tends to always be with cats, always in pink, feeding, doing anything of a nurturant aspect. Also, what plays into this is something that we know progresses through time, but we don't recognize it each and every time. If you'll notice the boy playing in the dirt, he has gotten the girl dirty. That is something culturally progresses through time. The boy is the one that dirties the girl, sullies the girl. So let's say a girl gets pregnant in her teenage years. Who's at fault for that? It is him. It is his responsibility. It was his fault she got pregnant. It is he that is the bad guy that sullied the girl. Remember that we play naive throughout our relationships. I always call it the movie move. You know, when you're in the movies on your date and he's trying to put his arm around you, the girl knows what's going on. She'll act like she doesn't know what's going on, but notice that she puts the pop on the opposite side. She leans in closer. She does whatever it takes to let you make it easier to put that arm around her, otherwise known as the movie move. She doesn't want the arm around you, she'll move away. She'll make sure things are in the way. She purposely understands what's going on, but doesn't state it straight out because we play naive. We play naive during foreplay. So we don't, men will think that it takes longer because they don't know what's going on. They absolutely know what's going on, and sometimes they're making sure that it takes longer because we need more foreplay in the first place. But do we straight up discuss it? And most of the time we do not, because of this whole cultural aspect that has come into play. Think of toys that are out there. When we look at pink, anything in pink is going to be more expensive. Even as you grow older, if you get hammers or any kind of equipment that is in pink, you're going to pay for it. So as soon as it turns pink, it becomes more expensive. And that's that whole cultural aspect that goes along with it. Now there are 2 videos on here that I'd like you to watch. One of those videos, if you click on those 2 hyperlinks that I have there, the first one is going to be an Audi commercial. Now in that Audi commercial, it's going to show a young man who defies the rules and then gets patted on the head for defying those rules. Men have been set up culturally to defy rules, and that's what's important. They could not have put a female in that role because it is unacceptable for females to defy rules, to go against what society says is acceptable. It can be as simple as when you go to a family reunion and you're young and you have to kiss great grandma who has that furry lip. And boys will be like, oh no, I'm not kissing her, and they run away. And the simple thing is, well, boys will be boys. Sorry, boy not going to kiss you. But girl will stand right there and kiss grandma even though she is just as disgusted by it as the boy is. But she will follow the rules because she wants everyone to be happy with her, pleased with her, like her. So she won't defy the rules that society has set for her on a regular basis and most often. Now the second video that I have in there actually was a Verizon commercial, and it was about how we embed this culturally in females, that will say, all right, we want her to be in science. Now girls love science, technology, and math up until about the 4th to the 5th grade. And then we have something take place that tells them that that's no longer important. What is more important to them is how they look, their beauty, whether they're wearing makeup or not makeup, lipstick, whatever. We have to look at that even in today's age. When we look at how often or how long it takes a man to get ready to go for an interview, it takes them on average 5 to 15 minutes, and that can include the full shower. For women, on the other hand, to get ready for an interview, it can take them hours to get ready for an interview. And the reason is they know that the first impression of what they look like will be more important than what their educational level is. They can have 2 women in the same room. One's beautiful, one's not beautiful to cultural standards. And the one that's not beautiful to cultural standards can have more education, do much better at that job, but they know that the female that's better looking will actually get the job. When we look at police officers, we have found studies by them themselves that say good-looking people get warnings more often than what they deem as bad-looking, and that goes to women more often than men. When we look at movies, look at the way women need to look compared to the way men need to look. Men can be overweight, women can't be overweight. Men can be old and they look distinguished. Women can't be because then they're just old maids. So there's this whole cultural aspect that is embedded at a very young age that women find that they must look good in order to also achieve whatever standing they want in society. So make sure you watch those videos, please, both of them. Now, when we come to looking at those cultural differences, though, do we allow girls to be more like boys on a regular basis than we allow boys to be like girls? I have yes, no, they're both okay while the child is young. The answer tends to be yes. What we look at is we have to look at the way we're raised. Girls can dress like boys and be tomboys, and that's more acceptable. Girls can defy some of those rules, and it's more acceptable. What about a little boy that asks for a Barbie? Or wants to dress up like Cinderella for Halloween, or paints their nails a nice glittery pink. Are those acceptable? No. But is it okay for the girl to dress in black, for the girl to have combat boots? Absolutely. So we still have cultural stereotypes that we're trying to break through, but we don't allow them to be for boys when the boy wants to be more like a girl or act more like a girl. So that leads us to this little thing. It's normal for girls to play with boys' toys, not normal for boys to play with girls' toys. And the main proponent that doesn't allow this to happen tends to be fathers and grandfathers that won't allow it as a rule. Okay? And this is embedded in us culturally as we progress through age. There are differences on communication between men and women, and we do tend to find women spend more time with their friends, they do more texting, and they do more phone calls. In fact, we looked at texting between men and women, and men will just write a letter K for okay, and that can encompass everything and anything, even if the question was an either or question. Would you like to go here for dinner, or would you like to go there for dinner? And the response is K. Women can have texts that are multi-pages long, where men have short, sweet, to the point texts. That is also the way we communicate verbally, phone calls, or in situations face-to-face as well. So let's take a look at the differences in those communication styles. Men, it's to the point. So it's state their opinions and they give solutions. Notice it's in red, so that means it's going to be a test question. They state their opinions, give solutions. So let's say you're at work and you're having a problem with the boss. When you go home to complain about it to a man will say, well, this is what you need to do, or this is how to fix that problem. And they mean do that. So the next day, if you haven't done it, are you allowed to complain about it? How about the next month or the next year? Are you allowed to complain about it when you've never taken their solution or never done it? Or even done it, but it didn't work out? And for men, they'll start to shut down. They'll start to tune you out. They don't want to hear about it, and they may even state, don't want to hear about it anymore because I already told you what to do and you haven't done that. Okay? Men also, when they talk to others, they talk about things. They talk about actions. It's not about emotions. It's not about relationships. It's about basketball. It's about the car. It's about things or actions. When we look at women, women tend and befriend. They talk about relationships more often. So if you have that problem at work and you talk to a woman, you can talk to her the next day, the next month, the next year, over and over and over about it, because they know there's all sorts of nuances in the relationships that are going on as well, and they bring in those nuances of relationships. It's also the tend and to befriend aspect of it, because it's all about compassion, caring, and continuing that friendship more than it is about resolving the issue. So remember that women talk about their feelings, emotions, and relationships, and it's all about keeping that relationship through that conversation. So I always tell students that you want to freak a man out, just tell him that you want to talk, because they're not used to that talking aspect. They always think it's a trouble aspect instead of a conversation. Now women, again, tend to want to talk about the relationship, the emotions that are going on there, instead of the actions. So it tends to freak men out more often than women. Now we can get into the sexuality part of it, and that is the physiological and the psychology of sex itself. Now remember, physiological means physical aspects of it. So who are the first people that really delved into and wanted to find out the stages of sex for us? And that was, of course, Masters and Johnson. And so how did they do their research? So I have 4 questions here, 4 options for you to choose from. Number 1, did they engage in sex, have sex together, and then document their sexual acts? Was it 2, that they watched others engage in sex? Was it 3, that they watched monkeys engaging in sex, and because monkeys are similar to humans, that they found out about humans through monkeys? Or number 4, was it that they surveyed individuals that have recently engaged in sex and then took that survey information to build all their knowledge? So I'll give you a second to choose one. I'd like you to choose one. Put it in your mind's eye. Write it down. I don't care. And then we'll go through the answer. Okay, now the answer. When we're looking at the how they did their research, it was by number 2, watching others engage in sex. So they watched others. It could be done through a screen. It could be done through a window. It could be done right in the room. And typically, it was done right in the room because they needed to measure wetness. They needed to measure pre-cum. They needed to look at and document color changes. They needed to document inflammation and the differences between those, the genitals engorging. They needed to measure flaccid compared to erect and what stages it goes through for both men and women. So they watched others engage in sex and then they documented that information. And yes, many people came to become a part of that, and some were paid, some were not. The money for it wasn't very good. It couldn't even get you a good appetizer at Applebee's or anything like that. No cocktails to go with it. So it was done for little money. So why did people do it? First of all, college students. College students will do anything for money. Second of all, it was a lot of people that wanted to know this information, didn't, and really felt the research was important for everyone. Now, when we go through the sexual response cycles that Masters and Johnson found, are men and women's sexual response cycles similar, meaning they are the same? We have yes, no, good grief, they're not even close. Some men and women are similar. Again, I want you to choose which one you think is the correct option. And the actual correct answer is number 3. Good grief, they're not even close. So I'm going to show you why they're not even close. Can we have a few men and women that ejaculate at the same time? It's extremely rare. Now, when we watch pornography, pornography shows that they happen at the same time. And because we watch this, we tend to believe that that's actually true. That is untrue. Untrue. And we'll go through all the reasons why it's untrue. So let's take a look at the male and female sexual responses. First, I want you to look at the male sexual response because the males are easy. Yep, males are easy because their response system tends to be the same for all of them. So we have an excitement phase that can be extremely quick. And mainly the reason why it is so quick is men are visual. So a woman gets out of a shower or their partner gets out of the shower naked, and they go from thinking about fixing the car or doing the dishes or something like that to instantaneously erect and ready for sex. And now that's what's on their mind. Visual. On the opposing side, women can bring vision into a part of it, but it is not actually what gets them aroused. So their partner or a male can get out of the shower naked and they'll be dancing around, going, hey, let's go. And women will be put that stuff away. I got grocery shopping to do. Vision is not what makes a woman aroused, and it is what makes a man aroused. And it can do it in 2.7 seconds. Completely flaccid, not even thinking about having sex, to wham, ready for right now. Okay? So after the excitement phase, we go into a plateau phase. The plateau phase is that they've gotten to the maximum capacity of excitement just prior to the orgasm. Many times, men will even let you know that they're about to come. It's almost there. That is the plateau phase. Then they have the orgasm. And then they go through what's called a refractory period, where they go from erect to flaccid or soft, and then they go through this resolution. Okay, so know that for men, I get asked, do they have multiple orgasms? No, in general, men don't have multiple orgasms. What they do have to do is go through that refractory period where they get soft or softer and a little portion of the resolution, and then they get re-excited through vision, through seeing it, and go through the same phases of plateau and then orgasm again. So they have to come around through the phases again. It doesn't mean it starts way at the bottom of the excitement phase. It can start towards the top, but they do go through where their erection becomes softer, and then they have to go through the process again. Okay. Now when it comes to the resolution, for men's resolution, it tends to be somewhat quick. They can roll over and go to sleep. That's because at the time of orgasm, oxytocin and vasopressin are released. When oxytocin and vasopressin are released, it mixes with testosterone, which can automatically make them tired or exhausted. And so they can roll over and go to sleep, okay, and be done with the whole act. So now let's look at the female one. Now the picture for the female one has actually been squished into a box so that it could fit next to the other one. And that's not actually the way it should go. There are 3 patterns that we have there. We have pattern 1, which is multi-orgasmic. It doesn't mean that you can just have 2 orgasms for females. They can have several orgasms in a row. They can also have several orgasms that are of the equal magnitude, or they can have the first orgasm be a pretty good heavy one, and then each one after that becomes lesser in intensity until they go down to the resolution. We have section 2, which is in sort of a turquoise color, and here's where most of our women lie. Section 2, they go through the excitement phase, and you'll never notice they never hit an orgasm. It seems like they could come on close and then they go back down. That is our largest population of women. They never have an orgasm during sex or during intercourse. And then they have, of course, the slowest resolution that's out there, which means you can get them primed and ready to rock and roll again more often and at a faster rate. And then we have in purple group 3 that goes through these lulls, and then they hit a good intense orgasm, and then they go through a quicker resolution, still not as quick as a man, even though it looks that way in a picture. So what I've done is taken that picture and sort of fixed it. You could see my lines coming in on the side. All 3 versions of women go through the excitement phase far slower than men because it's not about vision. And so people will say it's about touch, but you can grab them by the pussy, and that's not going to get them excited. That, in fact, could get them angry. So what we have to look at is its touch, its vision, it's all their senses coming together, and the main purpose of all those senses coming together is actually emotion. They are about the relationship and building that relationship, and the more time you put into the foreplay or excitement phase of it, the more oxytocin and vasopressin are released. So their oxytocin and vasopressin are not released during orgasm. It is released during the excitement phase. The reason it's not released during orgasm is because the largest percentage of women on Earth never have an orgasm during intercourse. So it's released during the excitement phase. That oxytocin and vasopressin mix with estrogen, which is the bonding. It bonds the relationship. That's why they have more difficulty with a one-night stand, because it makes a bonding as that foreplay is occurring. Okay? So the foreplay lasts a very long time. All right, so the first one we're going to look at is actually number 2 in the turquoise. So we've got that long plateau of excitement that happens. Then we go into the plateau where they stay at. What is the percentage of women that are in number 2 that never have an orgasm during penetration of a penis? That is 80% of the female population. They tend to say anywhere from 75 to 85% of the population, so we'll go right with the center mark and go 80% of the population never has an orgasm and are incapable of having an orgasm. There are many reasons why. The main reason is actually physical, but there are psychological reasons that can come into play. And we will go over the physical reasons first. So we look at that 80% of female population goes into that unable to ever have an orgasm, very slow resolution, if no resolution at all. We tend to say that 99 to 100% of the female population has at least faked an orgasm once. They do this so that they know that the men have tried their best. They don't understand why they can't have an orgasm, so they think there's something wrong with themselves. There's all sorts of things that come into play. Sometimes they just get tired, so they'll fake it. How can you tell if your female has had an actual orgasm or not? Your female, the snuggling afterwards. How much snuggle time do you have to put in? More snuggle time that you need, the more cuddling that you need afterwards, the more you know that that person has not actually had an orgasm and are probably in that 80 percentile. Okay? Now let's go to the number 1, multi-orgasmic. Again, slow progression that comes into play. Again, they can have it of the same intensity, several of them. They can have them of lesser intensity. Again, the resolution is slow. It's slower than men. Remember that all women, in fact, I believe it's a test question, all women resolve slower than men do. So when they roll over with a multi-orgasmic, they might want to cuddle for a few minutes, but then they'll roll over and they'll be ready to go to sleep. Cuddle time is much more reduced. And then we can look at number 3. Now, number 3 comes in and then it goes up where you think they're about ready to have an orgasm, and then they plummet. So, examples. They'll be getting going. You'll think they're ready to have that orgasm, and all of a sudden they'll say, oh my God, I forgot to get milk today. And then they plummet, and you got to go through it again, get them excited, and then they'll be, we need to paint the ceiling. The ceiling's turned yellowish, grayish, whatever. Oh, I think we need to paint. And then they'll go through the process again, and this can happen repeatedly. Now, most often with this group or population of people, they will go miss a plateau that is typical because each one of those lulls is actually the plateau. They go into an intense orgasm and then they can go through a resolution. Now it shows that resolution going straight down. That is incorrect. It's a slow progression. Remember, all females resolve slower than men. So they'll be the quickest though of the cuddle time. Short, sweet, to the point, move on. Okay? All right, so now when we look at 80% of that population in the number 2 section, what is my ranges of population for the other number 1 and number 3? They are 5 to 15% each. So that range tends to be if one of them is 5% of the population through one generation, then the other population has 10%. And so they balance each other out. And then the next generation will be, more of them will be multi-orgasmic, and then the other, they'll have 10% there, and then 5% will be in the other group. So whatever the percentages of one, the opposing side gets the opposing percentage. So about 5 to 15%, because we know that that group number 2 goes 70 to 85% most often. Okay. If you can't tell what I wrote down there, it says goes through hills. My writing is atrocious. All right, so this is what I would draw on the board. So we're going to take a look at what I draw on the board. So what I've done to show what it is between females and why that 80 to 85% lie in that no orgasm section for intercourse. I put the little dot there, the blue thing, as the clitoris, and then there's a drawn circle that's going to be our vaginal opening for the female genitalia. All of the female's nerve endings are in the clitoris. If you look at intercourse of a penis going into the vaginal opening, you will notice that the clitoris isn't getting touched. This would be the equivalent for a man and his penis never being touched, never being able to enter the vaginal opening, no hand help, nothing. So penis gets erect and then doesn't get touched. What's the likelihood of being able to have an orgasm without ever having that stimulation to the nerve endings? So it's the same thing for females. All of her nerve endings are in her penis, and her penis is the clitoris. So the clitoris needs to be stimulated in order for the female to have an orgasm for the largest percentage of population. Okay? Now, let's look at the inside of that vaginal opening. So we've got our clitoris, we've got the hole there for the vaginal opening. What does it look like on the inside, and why is it that they can't seem to have that orgasm? So the clitoral nerve endings will come down from the clitoris, and they tend to, the way it's supposed to work, is touch right where I've got that circular colored in red portion on the inside the vaginal opening, up on that hill portion. Okay, so if the nerve endings have touched there and then they go off from that, that is what's called the internal G-spot that you heard about, but many people can't seem to find. They can't seem to find it because it's on that hill. If you put a penis in that vaginal opening, it will go straight through but never touch that reddened portion or that G-spot, because unless that penis is hugely deformed or has some kind of tumor on it, it can't bend up and touch that thing. And when it doesn't get stimulated, then of course they can't have that orgasm. Now this is the way it's set up for most typically for females. Now if it's a little lower, if that G-spot is a little lower, then those are the ones that tend to be able to have an orgasm during intercourse. Some even have it higher on it. And for many women, that clitoral nerve endings never even touched. They're more set up for reproduction than they are for enjoyment of intercourse. So for many women, that nerve ending never even touches it, and they don't even have a G-spot. Most women do have the G-spot, just can't be found through penile penetration. You'll have to do it through finger stimulation, where you bring your finger up into that bended area, find that G-spot. You can actually feel the difference when a woman is stimulated so that you can find that spot. Otherwise, it's going to have to be purely through clitoral stimulation in order to bring her to an orgasm. So what is that sexual response that Masters and Johnson discussed, and we've already discussed quite a bit? Here's the definitions of them. First, we have the excitement phase, which both the clitoris and the penis are filling with blood, becoming erect. Lubrication takes place. Of course, breathing becomes more shallow, more rapid. Pulse becomes more rapid. The plateau, maximum of excitement before the orgasm. Orgasm tend to be contractions all over the body for men. For women, we have three versions that are discussed most often in psychology. They can have it all over the body as well, but most often it tends to be either the inner third or the outer third of the vagina. So if you were breaking that whole tube-like entrance into thirds, inner third or outer third can be where they can just have contractions, especially on our multi-orgasmic person when it starts to reduce in intensity. And then we have our resolution at the end. That's when the blood is decreasing from those areas. And remember again, women resolve much slower. Now, what is the main male motivator for sex? We have reproduction, otherwise known as having children, relationship and bonding, or recreation. I'll give you a second so that you can think of a response. Which one do you choose for men? The answer for men tends to be number 3 most often. They do it for recreation. Great exercise, great activity to do, burns lots of calories. Women, if you want it to burn calories, that means you got to be on top. That means you got to be fully active, sweating throughout it, not just a relaxed participant. Okay? So let's look at females. What's the main female motivator for sex? We have the same options: reproduction, relationship and bonding, or recreation. Again, make your choice. The main one for females is relationship and bonding. It is about becoming one with that person. Remember, oxytocin, vasopressin being released during the excitement phase actually makes women bond. So if they weren't in love with the person before, they have a far, far, far higher likelihood of being in love with them after sexual intercourse has taken place. Now, when we look at disorders and dysfunctions, we're not going to go into all of them. If we want to go into disorders and dysfunctions, they're gone into a little more in abnormal psychology, but they're gone into much more intensely in 280, which is human sexuality. So the main ones we're going to look at are premature ejaculation. What is it you need to know about that? For premature ejaculation, that is when a male ejaculates within 60 seconds. That's 1 minute of becoming erect. We tend to find out that this is highly genetic based, handed down generation after generation. We also know it can be medication based. Certain medications make that occur. Spinal injuries make that occur. There's all sorts of reasons. But the main thing that you need to know is it's ejaculation in 60 seconds or less. So just because he comes before her does not mean that he has premature ejaculation. Okay. Erectile disorder is the one that's most publicized, most popular out there, otherwise known as ED. Now, erectile disorder is the inability to get an erection or maintain one, which means they have one, but then it goes away. So a lot of times this has to do actually with blood flow and the blood flow to the penis that can be cut off when an erection occurs and then makes it go flaccid again. So the medications that are out there are really to push the blood flow through to keep that erection going. Low sexual desire is called hyposexuality. Now, for many, many years, in fact, all of our history, low sexual desire was not something that was a concern for women at all. They always deemed women as cold fish, that they didn't want to have sex. They typically don't want to have sex because that whole foreplay thing, that whole excitement phase has been shortened, has been reduced to the point that every aspect of sex that is important to them gets nullified. And so why have sex if they don't enjoy it at all? Because you've removed that excitement phase. So can you have a quickie? Absolutely. You can have a quickie now and again. But when a quickie becomes everything and all the time, women will stop wanting to have sex because there is no enjoyment of it. All the enjoyment portion or the excitement phase has been taken away. Now, I wouldn't do that because, remember, it's for bonding as well. So people can get married, they stop, or in a relationship for a long time, stop having sex. When they stop having sex, the bonding then starts to go away because you're not keeping it going through that excitement phase. So remember that that excitement phase is vitally important for females. Now, when it comes to low sexual desire or hyposexuality for men, that is always a concern. We know that there actually are 10 to 20% of the male population that have hyposexuality and are uninterested in sex. We find most often that it is related to medications. We know that high blood high blood pressure medication causes hyposexuality. It also causes ED. So we have to look at medications when it comes to low sexual desire and what those medications are actually doing to him. There is a genetic aspect to it. It's much smaller in numbers. In fact, it's pretty small numbers completely. Lack of orgasm or any response at all. That lack of orgasm for women is not deemed as abnormal. We just went through that 80% to 85% of women never have an orgasm, so it was just viewed as, all right, that must be normal for them, which is a sad thought process in the first place. But for men, it is considered as something that is of issue. Lack of orgasm means that they have an erection. They can go through sex, but they last extremely long because they can't seem to get to the point to have an orgasm. Again, spinal injuries come into play. Medications come into play. There's all sorts of things that can come into play for that. No matter what the issue is, we're going to look at it again like we've discussed behaviorally, psychologically, and socioculturally to see if we can figure out what the cause is and try to correct that problem. And here's an explanation of that. There are biological influences to each and every one of our issues, whether positive or negative, psychological and sociocultural. Now, over to the left-hand side, I have a biopsychosocial approach would say teens suffering from premature ejaculation. So let's say a teenager walks into a doctor's office and says he has premature ejaculation. What is it we're going to look at to try and correct that? They should be looking at one of each one of those areas: biological problems, psychological problems, sociocultural problems. So we've taken one from each and every one of them. So premature ejaculation due to alcohol, due to the media, due to underestimating the vulnerability of STDs. That would be taking a look at all three aspects instead of just one, which is the way that you should look at it. Now, I believe I have that as a test question, so you might want to take note of that. In relationships, our brain actually produces euphoria for us so that we can negate or forget about all the things that sort of aggravate us typically for a while. Now, our brain lights up, as you can see on the right-hand side, and that lasts to that intensity of lighting up for approximately 2 years. So you'll notice people break up around 2 years. There are things that can extend it, reduce it, but on average it's around 2 years. There's another time at around 7 years. Again, there are things that can extend that 7-year mark or reduce it, but on average it's 7 years. So some of that light turns off at the 2-year mark, and the rest of it turns off at the 7-year mark. So what your brain is setting it up for is to try to come up with some compromises on some of the things that annoy each of you on each other, so that once you've set up those compromises, it doesn't have to produce this impassioned love for the other person, and you've actually negotiated so that the love can just be without this massive romantic euphoria. So if you don't do that, that's when our breakups tend to occur. So what are some of those things? Oh, it can be as simple as putting the toilet paper roll on and which way it goes, or even not putting the toilet paper roll on. I do not understand, so you can tell this happens in my home, why I'm the only person who knows how to put that toilet paper roll on. So I'll come in the bathroom and there's a toilet paper roll sitting on top of the empty roll. What is that? You're sitting there anyway. Why can't you put that thing on? But I have come to the resolution that I am the only person who will ever know how to do it. So I might as well just get over it and do it. Now, you really have to come to that resolution. It can't be where every single time that toilet paper roll is sitting on there just annoys you, so you get even because they didn't do the dishes or because they didn't pick up something, or and you take it out on them for other things, because that conversation never gets corrected. It's got to be that you actually come to the resolution that that is something you will do forever, and you might as well get over it. All right, middle-aged people. When it comes to middle-aged people in their 40s and 50s, how much time or how many times do they have sex or a need for sex? So I have options for you. Oh, gross. My parents only had sex to produce my siblings and myself. Number two, the average is 2 to 3 times a week that they have sex or the want or need for it. Or number three, sexuality peaked at 18 years old. So make your choice. The answer is number two. On average, middle-aged people should be having sex 2 to 3 times a week. We do know that the sex reduction, if it takes place, then the bonding reduces. Remember, that's related to the women. So make sure that sex is taking place. Main issues that middle-aged people say cause them to not have sex tends to be teenage children. Teenage children that can't find the ketchup even though it's looking right at them in the refrigerator and have to yell out to find out where it's at, and their parents are trying to get busy. Or teenagers that say they're going out and they'll be back around 11 o'clock and then they show up at 8:30. Just destroyed the mood right there. Teenagers that for some reason think that a closed door means that you must knock on it or enter. All of those things. Teenagers, leave your parents alone. They need the sex to keep bonding, to keep that marriage strong. So find something to do. If you say you're staying out till 11, I don't care if you sit in the driveway, but leave them alone. Okay? Now the last one. Sexuality peaked at 18 years old. Now, sexuality peaking at 18 years old is on average for men. It's actually 18 to about 25 years old. That's when they're at their physical peak. Testosterone's pushing through them, surging through them. So they have more sexuality because it's related to testosterone. If you do not know when women's sexuality peak, women's sexuality peaks start in the age of 40s. 40s, 50s, and 60s are a woman's sexual peak. So men need to be involved. Women need it to keep that bonding going. Women's sexuality does not peak at 18 to 25. It's 40 to 60 years old. Why? Almost missed that. It's menopause. Menopause is reducing the estrogen, bringing in more testosterone. More testosterone or testosterone running the show means more want for sex. So there's lots of intimacy during middle age and should be lots of affection, sex, emotional experiences, that kind of stuff. So now let's look at grandma and grandpa. When we're looking at grandma and grandpa, whoa, how active are they? Do you have any idea how many times a week they're having sex? The average sex for those that are above the age of 65 tends to be 5 to 7 times a week if they're capable. So we're looking at healthy individuals here. So if they're capable, it's 5 to 7 times a week. Now you got to look at it this way. What better things do they have to do? They get bored. Ever notice that when the electricity is out, more sex happens? When you're bored, more sex. They're not working. They're not traveling as often. Their friends are dying, so they don't see them as often. There's all sorts of issues that come into play. So they're bored and they're like, hey, let's get busy. We also find out that of all the open relationships there are, and I mean open to new experiences, different experiences, hey, let's try this kind of thing, we find that those 65 and above are actually more open than any other generation. It actually relates a lot to females. Again, females are so concerned about being called a slut, being looked at that way, and all of the cultural oppressive thought processes that we have embedded in us. We will get to a point, and it tends to be 40s, 50s, again, when that menopause is coming through, that we don't care what other people think anymore. And so I always say, like in your 20s, when you're about to have sex, women want the lights off. They want the lights off because they're concerned about their body and what it looks like, and may even tell their partner, don't look at, my role, because that's what bothers them the most, and they're very concerned about how you view that on them. When women get older, it is what it is. It's not going to get better. They've struggled with it their whole life. It's a done deal. So now it's lights on, because here I am. I'm beautiful the way I am. If you don't like it, get out. So we find that they have lots of sex. Now, I always get students that say, well, wait a minute, my grandma lives at home alone. Well, I want you to look at who visits her on a regular basis, or grandpa, it doesn't matter. One of the main things that we have found psychologically for adults and their religious affiliations is that their religious affiliations come over and visit all the time. Their religious friends come over and visit, and we find that those visits encompass sex. Many will think that, well, grandma or grandpa are in a nursing home, so, they just can't. They're just not. And that is the most untrue. Of all the people that have the most sex, it tends to be those in nursing homes. There actually was a lawsuit pertaining to this, that they were locked in their rooms for quite a period of time. They sued because they weren't wandering, and that was the actual term, in quotes, wandering around. They knew exactly where they were going. They were going to Gertrude's room, and then they would go to Harriet's room, and then they were going to Edna's room, and they would go from one to another to another. That ED medication works wonders for individuals. And so, and they would even know, well, they're going so and so, and then they'll be here to me. And they wandered around knowing exactly where they were going. Anyone who works in a nursing home, I love talking to them because they usually pipe up right about now, and they're like, oh, goodness, yes. And we all hang out at the nurse's station or someplace to hide because we just don't want to see it. We just don't want to know what's going on, so we try to pretend as much as possible that this is not happening. All right, external stimuli, otherwise known as pornography. It can be pictures, it can be videos, it can be anything like that, any kind of nudity in the sexuality. Of course, it was built for men. It was made for men because that visual aspect for them that stimulates them. So it typically arouses men more than women. Can women enjoy it? Absolutely. But because that visual aspect, they need other things involved in order for that visual aspect to stimulate them. And that can include the fantasy world as well. Now, there are dangers associated with pornography, with images of nudity. First of all, it distorts our proportions for females. They, Photoshop those pictures. They even Photoshop videos. And they distorts what a woman actually looks for and what you should actually look for in women. Every woman's different. Their vaginas are different, just like men's penises are different. But women's can be more substantially different. And so the satisfaction of what is viewed can be skewed based off of those images. The other thing, it also distorts what is appropriate sexuality-wise. Now, we have fantasies. Men and women both have fantasies. Number one, men fantasy tends to be the same continuously through generations, and that's with two women being involved, menage a trois, as they call it, or a threesome. A lot of times that can include twins. It can have all sorts of things included in that fantasy. Number one fantasy still tends to be for females of non-consent. Doesn't necessarily mean rape. It means non-consent. The problem with it is that pornography has taken those fantasies and skewed them into this is what they want. A woman's non-consent fantasy is with a consensual partner, and that is really hard to get through people's heads. That it's got to be with somebody that they trust so extensively that they will actually tell them their fantasy, which is rare. And when they tell them their fantasy, it's got to be with somebody with absolute trust, not a stranger, not happening right off the bat, this is something that slowly progresses through a trusting relationship. So even though they might have fantasies of a non-consent, it is actually with that person's consent. Okay? The other thing is that pornography tends to tell us that men and women have the exact same sexual responses, that they go through the same excitement phase, they go through the same plateau phase, they go through the same orgasm phase, and they resolve the same. And that is absolutely untrue. Remember, it is extensively untrue. It is rare to find them that they can. Okay? So, when we look at some of the problems that can also come from it, there are some people that become obsessed with pornography or obsessed with pornography type image or nudity images so that they don't need genital sensation to be aroused and then to orgasm. They're rare. On the other side of that is what I have here. We do know that even those with spinal cord injuries that cannot have any genital stimulation still feel sexual desire and still feel that sexual interest. The brain does give you dreams that are of sexual and fantasy based off memory, based off wants, needs, etc. Fantasies should never be a replacement for that sexual activity, should be to enhance that sexual activity. Women have been told for culturally for so long that men will replace sexual activity with that nudity and with pornography, and they'll become obsessed with it and then will not be able to be aroused by a female. And that is to the largest extent untrue. It happens every once in a great while, but to the largest extent untrue. So women will say, have an absolute no when it comes to pornography. And instead of being a no, become a part of that interaction, and you'll find that you can both be stimulated together and it can be an emotionally bonding situation. When it comes to teenagers, many people believe, and generationally this happens, they know when they're a teenager they can't get sex to stop, but as we become parents and adults, we all of a sudden start to think, well, if we just tell them to say no, it's just like drugs, just say no to drugs, they won't do drugs. We find that they do drugs more because we told them don't do drugs. It's the same thing with sex. The more we tell them don't do it, the more they do it. And also remember, sex is as innate in us as hunger is. So you can't say just stop eating. You can't just say just stop having sex, just don't do it. So what we do instead is we tell them don't do it because you could die from it, don't do it because you could get pregnant from it, and we guilt teenagers into it so that they're unprepared for when it's going to happen. Because it's going to happen, and then there's no condoms there, then there's no birth control there, then there's nothing there for them to stop it. And then they think, well, just once won't cause any issue, and of course it does. So what we've done is communicated on such a negative aspect that we don't prepare them. So we have in society in the developed countries the highest percentage of pregnancies while they're still teenagers. We also have the highest percentage of sexually transmitted infections while teenagers as well. The only group that outdoes teenagers on sexually transmitted diseases and infections are the 65 and older group because they're having so much sex with multiple partners. So we have to fix our communication. Now, we know so much about teenage sexual activity that we even know when they do it most often. You've probably been given a curfew, so let's say 9, 10, 11, I don't know, whatever time your curfew is, because parents tend to believe you're going to have sex afterwards in your vehicles. We actually know most teenagers have sex in their homes at 4 o'clock in the afternoon while their parents are still at work and while they're out of school. So let's look at our communication issues. We have 4 main problems. First of all, the communication we have between partners. So birth control, understanding of what's going to be done prior to sex taking place just doesn't happen. The main reason it doesn't happen is the communication from adults to teenagers to just don't do it. Don't plan for it. If you don't plan for it, then it won't happen. And again, nothing could be more wrong. That's that guilt that plays in. The other thing that we have a huge issue with is the disinhibition that comes along with alcohol. So you may not have even thought about sex prior to alcohol, but once you take a drink of alcohol, the thought, and the more drinks you have, the more that thought becomes something you will do. So we find in today's age, parents will say, well, I don't want you drinking someplace else, so I'll buy you the alcohol and I'll have you drink right at home. Bring your friends over, you can drink in the basement or something like that. And they'll buy them alcohol and put it down there, but they don't buy them condoms to put with the alcohol. Because for some reason they think they'll drink together, but they won't have sex together. and then they don't come down to find out, or they come down and the lights are off, or people have separated and these two people have left and you don't know where they're at, or there's all sorts of things that can happen. Give a teenager alcohol. You are increasing the likelihood of that teenager having sex. Media portrayals. In our media, movies, television shows, and whatnot, they'll show you people having sex, but they won't show them having protected sex. They don't show them putting a condom on. They don't show them taking birth control pills. They don't show them. That is a United States thing. That is a really particular thing to the United States. Other countries actually show that with them putting a condom on, with them taking birth control. But because we have such conservative thought processes and conservative voting to make sure that that doesn't take place, they will allow the sex to happen but remove the plan for sex. Because our belief system is, in the conservative thought process, that if we tell them to plan for it, that means they're going to have sex more. So we don't want to show them planning for it. We don't want to discuss planning for it, because then they'll have it. But for some reason, we tend to think that showing sex, which, by the way, men are visual, showing sex won't increase the likelihood of having sex. Sometimes I don't understand our thought processes or how we come to these conclusions. When we come to looking at sexually transmitted diseases or sexually transmitted infections, they're both the same thing. So maybe we have one gentleman, his name is Herb in here, who has had sex with 9 people. 9 different people throughout his lifespan, not knowing that he had an STD, or 9 different people in a month. I don't care, just 9 people. And then those 9 people have had sex with 9 other people, and those 9 people have had sex with 9 people. We tend to multiply incorrectly. Many will go 9 times 9 times 9, and bam, there you go. Plus you add Herb in the mixture. That's not it. When we actually do the correct multiplication, we actually have 511 people that now have an STD or STI. So our multiplication goes haywire on this in figuring out how many people now have that sexually transmitted disease. The other thing is that many people believe that once they have a sexually transmitted disease, they by law have to tell other people that they have it so that they've been informed. You are incorrect. They should, but do they? What about the people that they don't remember having sex with, or the ones that they had alcohol involved and completely blanked out that sexual act? What about oral sex? Many people discount that and say that doesn't play a part in it. What about and telling those people because they don't count oral sex? What about the fact that you hate that person now because you broke up with them, and them having an STD or an STI, they deserve it, so they're just not going to get told. Then we also have to take into account if you have a sexually transmitted infection. Many times you'll be told by your doctor, oh, you have an infection, you'll be given antibiotics, but they don't tell you that you have an STD or an STI in particular. The reason they don't tell you is because many will deny it completely and then won't take the antibiotics because they deny it so intensely. Many people will then fight, argue, become aggressive towards the person, the bearer of bad news that tells them. So it tends to be safer for doctors to not say a word and just say, well, you have an infection that we need to take care of, prescribe some antibiotics or whatever they need to prescribe, and then the information doesn't get out from there. Now, can a doctor tell? So let's say you have a doctor and your significant other goes to them as well as you do, and that doctor finds out you have an STD or an STI. Can they tell the other person that is their client that they better be careful that there's an issue here? The answer is no. That's the confidentiality we have. No, they can't. Even if we have somebody with an STD or an STI that knows they have it, purposely does not take care of it, and purposely has sex with others to transmit it, to infect others on purpose. Yep, there are people like that. They'd actually do that. And they tend to be what you would deem as the nicest people around. Never could imagine it from them. Can we force them to tell the people? And that is, no, we can't force them. That is their confidentiality, and it cannot be broken. Now, we're just briefly, and your book goes over sexual orientation, or all the books that we've had in psychology just briefly touch this. And that's because it changes so wildly and we are learning so much so quickly that the books just can't keep up with it. So they've stuck with first the definition of orientation. And sexual orientation is who you are attracted to sexually. Now, your sexual identity, on the other hand, is the term that goes along with what you identify as. The main three that psychology books still have remained with is heterosexual, bisexual, and homosexual. You want to know the others, you want to know more about those others, then you need to take the class 280 for human sexuality to understand the wide variety that we have out there. Heterosexual, if you don't know, is man and woman. Bisexual means that you go with either or, and homosexuality is the same sexuality as yourself. Now, the origins of sexual orientation, of course, they've done tons of research trying to figure out why does bisexuality, homosexuality happen compared to heterosexuality. And at first they thought it was abuse, and no, abuse didn't have anything to do with it. And then even the books today have the thing saying that the second born boy tends to be more homosexual than heterosexual. That can happen, but we are actually finding out through research that it's not a cause of it. Okay, we're looking for cause and effect here. Genetics, they are finding out most often, tends to be what it is handed down generation after generation, and how it's exposed to the hormones in their body and hormones in the womb. We can look at homosexual brains compared to heterosexual brains, and we've actually had researchers put them in piles, saying male compared to female, and when it comes to the homosexual brain, they find that there's certain areas of the brain that can be, for a man, look more like a female's brain, and for a female look more like a male's brain. And they find that a great deal of that has to do with genetics and with hormones being introduced. Is there more testosterone or less testosterone, more estrogen or less estrogen, and every other hormone that we have in there and how it interacts. So do we have a true cause and effect? And at this point in time, we still have to say no, because the research that we have has not been tested over and over and over again. Remember that reliability of it, that capability of replicating it over and over again hasn't been found as of yet. We do know that there are many reasons we believe can come into play. Another study that had been replicated over and over again, was reliable, was looking at a concern that happened many years ago, and that was, what was it with homosexual parents and the ability to adopt children, the ability to raise children? Did it cause more problems in those children? The main concern was, did homosexual parents cause homosexual children? The answer is no. It doesn't matter if it's heterosexual parents, homosexual parents, bisexual parents, or any other kind of sexuality there are out there. They do not cause their children nurturant-based to have the same sexuality. No. So further research went into which are the best parents. The actual thing was to actually prove that heterosexual parents were better parents and had better parenting skills than homosexual parents. They actually went the opposite direction. They found that homosexual parents have better parenting skills and do better parenting than heterosexual parents. Why is that? Well, because homosexual parents grow up in a situation where they're being picked on all the time, they're being tortured all the time, they're being, lots of negativity goes towards them, laws are made against them, all sorts of things are negative biases against them, that they throughout their life actually grow up learning how to deal with those in a better way, in a more cooperative way. And so they teach their children, no matter how different they are or what areas of difference they are, even if it's as little as being right-handed compared to left-handed or any other variation of differences. They know how to deal with these situations better, so they teach their children how to deal with these situations better and actually increase by doing so the child's self-esteem, self-understanding, self-worth, self-compassion, and all of those for others. So they establish in their children an understanding of worth in others, an understanding of why others react the way they do, and their ignorance and lack of understanding is actually the cause. Where heterosexual parents just do not do that because they don't have that same level of understanding. When it comes to homophobia, which gender tends to have more problems with homophobia? And that tends to be males, of course. They've been told from a very young age that, if they do anything that is wrong, different, stupid, that they must be gay. And so that implication causes them to be so fearful of being gay that they have the highest percentages, highest problems with homophobia in and of itself. Women can hug and kiss each other. They can hold hands. They can have emotional connections with each other and not have a problem with it even if they're heterosexual. Heterosexual women have the least likelihood of problems with being friends with those that are homosexual, bisexual, interacting and understanding and politically understanding as well. Men, on the other hand, have, again, the most difficulty. If you look at men compared to women when they go into a restaurant, two couples meeting each other, women will hug and kiss each other, and then men to women. But then when it comes to the man-to-man, watch the awkwardness right off the bat. They do a fist pump. They do a handshake. They'll back off a little bit, like, don't you come in for a hug. So they have the more homosexual problems and homophobic issues. So the only time they're allowed to really touch each other after a football game, they can give each other a swat on the rear end. But I never really see it when they both got an A on a test or when they see each other in the restaurant or anything like that. Okay. Now, when it comes to STDs or STIs, I want you to look at where in Michigan are the two most diagnosed STDs. That means where are the largest numbers of sexually transmitted diseases and infections? Is it St. Clair County, Sanilac County, Detroit, who has a lot of people, and Detroit and every one of its surrounding suburbs, which has tons and tons of people? So which one has the most? I want you to make your choice. Number one is St. Clair County. St. Clair County has the most STDs and STIs. Why is it that we have the most and we are number one in Michigan? Conservative thought processes. Conservative thought processes are, again, guilt people into not having it so that they are unprepared, and don't mention it afterwards. Lie if you've had it. It is such a big thought process that we have actually voted to make sure that we don't hand out condoms, that we don't do the training that we need to for children and teenagers to understand it to the extent that they need to. So we actually have the largest number of those with it. Now, number two, the backup has been in the past Sanilac County. We actually know exactly when that happened. It happened when the mall was built. And then Sanilac County started to come to the mall to hang out, having sex with St. Clair County, started to increase the numbers for Sanilac County. Now, why is it Detroit? And Detroit and all of its surrounding suburbs do not have it. They are of a liberal thought process, which means teach more information and give them what they need to protect themselves. So in St. Clair County, Sanilac backup, here's some of the wonderful things that you can have with that conservative thought process. Notice that a lot of them will say that you're asymptomatic, which means that you don't have any symptoms of it for a long period of time. No early symptoms. So you could be carrying this, giving it to other people and not even know it. Also, a lot of the symptoms can be the same as a urinary tract infection. So they can just think that that infection was a urinary tract infection, taking the antibiotics for it, not even recognize and know that it was an actual STD or STI. Or many will do the things over the counter for urinary tract infection or anything along that line and not even know that they have it. I always get questioned on pubic lice and what pubic lice is. We tend to call them in this area crabs. So pubic lice is the same thing as having crabs.